to this day, there's only been maybe a couple people who have asked me how I'm doing.
Hello, you are listening to NPE Stories. This is a podcast where NPEs can share their story. I am your host, Lily, and I found out I was an NPE through an ancestry DNA test that changed my life forever. NPE is a term that stands for not parent expected or non-paternal event. This means that one or more of our parents are not who we believe them to be. NPE Stories is a podcast where NPEs can share their story of what their original family was like, how they found out they were an NPE, and what their journey has been like since the day they found out. And welcome to episode 47, and today I'm speaking with Meredith. Hi, Meredith.
Hi, Lily.
Thank you so much for sharing your story today.
Oh, thank you for doing what you do. That's wonderful.
And I know you've heard a lot of these. You and I have been talking for a little while. Without further ado, how about start with your family of origin and let us know what your original family was like.
Growing up, it was my mom and dad, my brother, and myself. We were just your all-American family. I mean, my dad was and is a retired postman now. My mom didn't really work from home a whole lot. She mainly was at home. We had we had pets, we had dogs, we had cats, just your normal family that, my mom just dug into like the family history, and she had been doing it for as long as I can remember, like back when I was like a freshman in high school. So at the time, I took an interest in it when she would talk to me about it. But then as I got older, she has like all these binders and boxes of stuff that she has printed out from different ancestors. And she told me how far back she's got it on my dad's side and how far back on her side. So then, of course, I really was getting interested in it. And I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. Something that I would love to get in on so that I could pass it on to my children and now my grandchildren. Growing up, like I said, Mom had done so much research. And it wasn't until it's probably when I had my children. It's when I was like really getting into it. And we would sit down and we'd talk about it. And she would tell me different things that she had found. And that we go back to like Betsy Ross and, some of the presidents and all that. And I was really, really into it. Well, her and Dad both, when that whole ancestry DNA stuff came about, or was really becoming popular, her and Dad had both tested. Well, I had thought, there's no sense, I shouldn't have to worry about being tested because, my mom and dad had been married since 1965 and I was born in 70. So, I was telling myself, why spend the money? Because just by looking at their tests, I could tell where I come from just by the fact that Mom and Dad had done the tests already. And my husband's sister-in-law had been after me to get him to do a DNA test because she's into genealogy and everything. Well, at the time he had refused. Well, one day he had decided, he was asking me about it. So he had finally decided to do it. Well, it was on my birthday. I had bought him his DNA test. Well, then after seeing everything that, came about with him and him finding his dad and a whole nother family and all that, I thought, wow, I think I am going to do mine. So I ordered a DNA test and it seriously sat and just kept getting moved around for, I bet you, 3 months before I finally decided to spit in that tube. And I told my mom and dad, I said, I sent in my DNA, my DNA test. And I remember specifically asking my dad, is there any kind of family secrets I need to know about? And he laughed and said, none that I'm aware of. And I specifically remember telling him, as long as you come back as my dad, everything is fine. I specifically told him that. And I can remember him telling me, Skeeter, because they call me Skeeter, he said, make sure you let me know when you get your test back. And I'm like, okay, well, it said on or about April the 6th, and this was of last year. And so my husband was doing a bowling tournament, and our grandson was going with us, and he was in our van, and we were on Interstate 75, and we were going down the road, and we had to go to Dayton. And I remember telling my husband, oh, my results are in, I've got to look. So, we're just sitting there chit-chatting, and grandson's in the back, and I opened it up, and of course I had to go right to matches. And I saw my mom, and it showed up as mother-daughter. My dad was nowhere on there. And I was scrolling up, and I'm looking at these names, and I had already looked at my dad's, his ancestry. So I knew his cousins had done it. So I knew that they should have been on mine. And, well, they wasn't. None of my dad's family was on there, and my dad wasn't. So I'm freaking out. My husband's driving, and I'm like, oh my God, my dad's not my dad. And my husband's like, what? And I said, oh my God, and I'm like scrolling frantically, bawling by this time. So he turned up the music and put it all in the back so that my grandson, because he was 7, he didn't know what was going on, and we didn't want him to know what was going on. So I got a hold of my dad first, and I said, Dad, you're not showing up on my ancestry. And he's like, oh, that's just probably because mine's set to private. And I was like, oh, okay. I said, well, you about gave me a heart attack. Well, then we laughed about it, because I thought because his was private, I guess I was thinking, well, then his cousins wouldn't show up either. Well, that's not the case. They still would have showed up just because my dad's was private. I would assume that I would still see people that were his cousins show up on mine. So I'm naming off these people to my dad. And I said, does this name sound familiar? And he's like, no, I don't know that name either. And I was like, he's like, oh, well, maybe they're your mom's, and I'm like, no, Dad, it would say mother's side next to it, because everybody that, is on my mom's side shows up as mother's side. And so, believe it or not, he called Ancestry and told them that they had screwed up. So, of course, I'm trying, by this time, we're laughing about it because, it's like, oh, okay. I even called my brother that I grew up with and told him that Dad about gave me a heart attack because he had his stuff set to private. And I said, it scared me, and we laughed about it, got a big chuckle out of it. Well, this was like at 9:00 in the morning. And by probably about 2:00 Saturday afternoon, I knew that that wasn't the case, because I had went to my dad's ancestry, and it said you and and said it has his name there, share no DNA, or he hasn't taken the test yet. And that was the biggest slap in the face, because then that's when it finally hit me. So then I screenshot it and sent it to my husband's sister, and she's like, how did you get that? So I told her how I did it, and she's like, yeah, she's like, I've been looking through it all day. She says, I'm sorry, but she says, I don't think, he's your dad. So by this time I'm calling my dad and he didn't answer. Well, I knew that I had to get to the bottom of it because he was going to see that we did not match, obviously. So I called my mom, and I said, I got my DNA test results back. And she's like, you did? And I said, yeah. I said, you're my mom. And she's like, well, duh. And I said, and Dad's not my dad. And she went, huh. That was the reply I got, was a, huh. And I said, Mom, is there something you need to tell me? She's like, well, maybe you belong to the people that were standing at the window that I was arguing with who you belong to.
Oh,
and there was always this family joke because I was 2 foot long and weighed 10 pounds when I was born. So I was a lot bigger baby that was in the baby nursery than these little 7 and 8 pound babies, And I guess this other couple standing there was arguing with my mom over who I belonged to. Well, I finally told my mom as I'm crying, I said, Mom, this isn't funny. I don't know any of these people. I said, did you have some fun back at the end of 1969 that need to tell me about? And she's like, well, I wouldn't necessarily call it fun. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? And she's like, well, there was a knife involved. And I'm like, what? I said, so she said it was forced. I'm like, really? And she's like, and I just had that feeling that she was just very vague, and I'm sure that some people don't want to go into detail with stuff like that. I get it. But our family has always been close enough. We can always tell when the other one is fibbing, whether it's face to face or whether we're on the phone with them. And I could just feel that something was not right. And I said, do you know this last name? And the last name was Ackerman. And I said, does that name ring a bell? And she said, yes. And I said, oh, so you know who my biological father is? And she said, yes. And I'm like, oh, so do you have a first name? Yes. I'm like, okay, what is it? And she's like, well, can you remember that one show that had the talking horse? And I'm like, what? So I had to guess on what my father's name was, my biological father's name was, because she didn't want to come right out and say it because my dad was sitting there. So she didn't want him to know yet. So she was having me play the guessing game on my end of what his name was.
Oh, no.
Well, yeah, all I could think of was Ed,
Yeah.
And that's not even it. His name is actually Sidney Francis, but they called him Francis. And I was like, okay, and who is he? Well, at the time, it wasn't quite sinking in. And growing up, my parents had this guy and this woman that were best friends. They would go and visit him in Myrtle Beach. And I grew up listening to her talk about these people. And there was Shirley and Francis. Well, then later on, it was Shirley and Butch. Well, and they have 3 sons, and my parents, even up until my early adult years, they would still go to Myrtle Beach and visit these people. And, Shirley would call and talk to my mom on the phone and I would answer. This was like while I was growing up, and I'd sit and I'd talk to Shirley for a little bit and I'd ask her how her kids are, and so they were like best friends. Little did I know that one of Shirley's sons was my half sibling. I had no idea. And so when she told me that, what his name was, it wasn't ringing any bell, it just did not dawn on me at all. And when growing up, we had neighbors that had the last name Ackerman. And that's who I was thinking. That she was going to tell me it was, but it's not. It's a whole different group. But anyway, when I got done talking to her, I got a hold of my husband's sister and was telling her everything. And of course, you do the Facebook snooping and, all that stuff. And I found out that I had a half brother and his name was Chris. And I had told myself, because I was so angry, I had told myself, I don't want another brother. I have one. I have a brother already. Yeah. I don't know this other person. I just want family history. I just need health because I have some health issues. I just want the health aspect of it. So I had no intentions of even notifying Chris at all. And I had tried to get a hold of a couple people I did manage to get a hold of a second cousin, and her dad, which would have been my first cousin, didn't really know a whole lot because this family has got older, I guess the grandfather had a group of kids when he was younger, and then he had a group of kids when he was older. So my cousin's father was from, if I'm not mistaken, the first group of kids. And then my biological father was, if I'm not mistaken, towards the end. So, he didn't really have a whole lot that he could help me out with or anything. Well, then when I did nothing but cry for 24 hours. Well, then the time came and I thought, I'm going to have to call my brother. So I called my brother that I grew up with. I told him, I said, can you remember how I told you I got my DNA results and Dad said his stuff was private? And he's like, yeah. And I said, well, Dad's not my dad. And he said, yes, he is. I said, Paul, no, he's not. I said, Mom told me. And he's like, what? And I said, she told me it was some guy named Francis and the last name was Ackerman. And he said, oh my God, do you not know who that is? And it just didn't ring any bell. And she's like, Shirley from Myrtle Beach? I'm like, yeah. And she's like, that was her husband. I'm like, you're crapping me,
Yeah.
And so I was just like dumbfounded. So for a month, I would get on Facebook and I would look at, I would do research on my brother Chris. And I thought, no, I'm not. I don't even know what I would say to this person, Well, then one day my sister-in-law sent me a message. She said, you're going to be really mad at me. And I was like, why? And I knew, I just knew, well, she had sent Chris a message. And he's a truck driver. And she sent me the whole entire conversation. And at first, he thought that she was scamming him because of the questions she was asking. And so she's like, she explained to him that I had done a DNA test and that we believe that his father is also my father. And he said, you talking about Marvin Sue? Well, he knew, that we were from Ohio and that my my parents are Marvin Sue. So he wanted her to call him. And so she called him and talked to him for a little bit. Well, then he had told her, tell my sister I've always wanted a sister and that I love her already.
Oh.
And yeah, so I thought, oh God, do I call? Because I was so angry for that first month that I can't even put it into words. I just, I didn't want nothing to do with this other family. I just wanted history. Yeah. And I am so thankful that Angie did what she did because now me and Chris, I talk with him more and see him more, and he lives out of state than I do my brother here in Ohio, who lives like 25 minutes down the road.
Oh, wow.
And
you guys have a relationship.
Oh yeah, me and
now.
Chris. Oh yeah, definitely. And it was almost like when we first met. And it's funny because growing up, Lily, we always knew that the other one existed. He knew that Marvin Sue had a son and a daughter, and I knew that his mom Shirley had 3 sons. So we always knew that, but we had never met. Well, when we were younger, like real little, like as in diaper little. But when my mom and dad would go on vacation, I never had an interest in going. So me and my brother never went with them when they would go on vacation once we got older. So we always knew that the other one existed. We just didn't know that we were siblings, that we were half siblings. So then, me and him started talking on the phone. And then he got himself a DNA test because we wanted to see it in writing for sure. Because he had talked to his stepmom, the woman that was married to Francis when he passed, and Francis had told her they lived with my mom and dad, and that the only reason he slept with my mom is because my dad was sleeping with Chris's mom. Now, whether that's true, I don't know, but it was the 60s, so maybe they did a little bit of swinging. Who knows?
Uh-huh.
I mean, the only one that would know anything is, well, naturally, are my mom and dad. And I've asked my mom that question, and I could so tell that she was fibbing, because when she came home from Texas, her and my dad, me and my brother Paul was sitting in her living room, and I said, "Hey, Mom," I said, "So were you guys like swingers?" And she's like, "Well, what's your definition of a swinger?" And I'm thinking, now, why would you ask that?
Mm-hmm.
I said, did you guys like switch partners? And the look on her face, Lily, gave it away. And me and my brother walked outside, and we looked at each other, and we started laughing. We're
No,
like, yeah, they did. They
they
had to,
did.
because,
Okay.
oh gosh, Lily, it was so obvious.
You could
Just
tell.
the way, yes, you can just tell, our family has always been close. We're the type of family that would, after supper would get done, we'd clear off the table, we'd play Trivial Pursuit, or, something along that line. And we would joke, and I could so tell she was fibbing. And me and my brother just thought it was hysterical when we went outside. We're like, yeah, she's fibbing. So, I can laugh about it now. And
Now, yeah.
well, yeah. And I mean, there was times I would laugh about it even then, because if I didn't, I was afraid I would just have like a nervous breakdown or
Yeah,
something,
yeah, yeah.
so I just figured I just had to kind of laugh it off and try to make the best of it. And, Chris is a truck driver, and he comes through Ohio all the time. And he just happens to come through where I live. And get this, my real dad's name is Sidney, and I live in Sydney. And it's spelled Sidney, and that's how his name was spelled, not Syd, Ney or whatever. But yeah, that's exactly how it's spelled. Exactly the town I live in was his name.
That's cool.
Yeah, so I finally got to meet Chris. I was nervous. Dave went with me. It was on a Saturday morning. We met at the truck stop and ate breakfast, and he hugged me, and he cried, and I was nervous, of course. And he just sat there and looked at me and told me, "You look so much like Daddy. You look so much like Daddy." I look like the older version of my biological, and he looks like the younger version of when, he was younger and whatnot. But we ended up going to Myrtle Beach. So that was May is when I finally met Chris, and we went to Myrtle Beach in October for a vacation and went to Chris's house. I went to the graveyard. He took me to the graveyard to where my biological father, because I don't call him dad because I have a dad. I'll either say father or bio is what I call him. But when I'm talking to Chris, I call him our father. But he took me to the graveyard, and then he came back to the room for a little bit, and I got to meet his daughter. So for the first time, my kids actually have first cousins, because my brother that I was raised with doesn't have any children. I'm actually an aunt, and a great aunt, because his girls have got children. And he's also an uncle and a great uncle. And gosh, we probably have gotten together. Oh, I can't, honestly, I've lost track of how many times, because every time he comes through Ohio, he'll tell me, and I'll meet him at a gas station, if it's within reason, within within a half hour drive, and we'll stop, even if it's just for him to take a 15-minute break, and we'll sit down and talk or whatever, and then he gets back in his truck and goes, and I come home.
Nice.
Yeah, so, and he's met my other brother. He was in a layover or whatever, doing his 12-hour break here in Sydney. So I had picked him up, and we went out to, me and my husband took him to dinner, and then we dropped my husband off here at home. And then I took him on, on north to meet my other brother. So he has met my daughter and her kids, and of course my husband, and my brother that I was raised with.
Oh, that is so cool.
So yeah, it's been a roller coaster.
Mm.
most definitely. And to this day, I really don't think there's only been maybe a couple people who have asked me how I'm doing. You know what I mean? Just to say, hey,
Yes.
how are you doing? Not, of course, Dave's sister, my husband's sister, was worried about me because I was just a mess, as one can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And so, she would get a hold of me, or she'd call me and ask me how I was doing. And then I've got my best friend who's been my best friend for, oh gosh, well, my daughter's 28. So like probably 27 years, me and her has been best friends. And she would ask me how I was doing. But for the most part, a whole lot of people, I don't think it phases people. You know what I mean? I don't know if it's just because they haven't gone through it, but I hear, oh, your dad is still your dad. He loves you,
Mm-hmm.
that won't change. And I'm looking at people, and that's got to be the one word that I have learned that will get on an NPE person's nerves more than anything is someone to tell me, he's still your dad. Well, yeah, he's still my dad, but I look in the mirror now and I don't even know who I'm looking at.
Yeah.
It's like half of my identity has just, I don't even know who I am.
Yeah.
And I still have those moments to where it's like, I'll look at myself in the mirror and it's like, wow, I don't even know who's looking back. Well, I do now because I look just like him, but
Yeah.
it's just this whole experience has just totally been mind blowing. Now I've got the whole entire family set up doing DNA tests. My daughter has done hers. We've done 3 of her 4 children already. My husband's daughter has done hers. My son has no interest, and my brother I was raised with has no interest.
Mm.
And see, when Chris did his, and we found out that, it was pretty sure that they were swingers, I told Chris, I said, oh my God, what if you belong to my dad?
Oh, yeah.
Because he's like, now, why did you go and have to say that?
Oh, no. Yep.
Because I never even gave it a thought until we found out, that they had supposedly switched partners. But, I would have been conceived in like September, October, or something like this. And if it was forced, I don't understand why my mom and dad would still go visit them
Mm.
in Myrtle Beach, or let alone let them still live with them until spring of
Do you
70.
do you think your birth father knew that you were
No,
okay?
no, no, because as a matter of fact, for 6 months, I sat on the truth. And my dad, my dad,
Yeah.
he is a very honest person. He believes in God. He, church going man. And he is very upfront and honest. And I kept begging my Mom, you've got to tell him. You've got to tell him. No, he ain't going to find out. Mom, yes, he will find out because he knows we're not a match. He knows that. You have to tell him. And no. Well, my husband, was like, no, just, leave it alone. He was upset because him and my dad are close. But I couldn't live with it because my dad is the type that if he would have found or figured this out on his own, and if he would have known that we all knew and nobody told him, he would have hit the roof.
Mm. Okay.
I mean, he would have been upset. So I finally, I did it over Messenger, if you can believe it. I couldn't even do it on the phone. I was talking to him, and I asked him, I said, haven't you wondered, doesn't the last name Ackerman in South Carolina ring a bell? And she's like, yeah, Francis and Shirley. And I said, Dad, he is my biological dad. And he's like, what? And this is all going back and forth in Messenger. And I said, Mom told me. And then he's like, his next reply was, I think I'm going to puke.
Oh, no.
And I'm thinking, great, what have I done? He wasn't even at home, come to find out. He was at Walmart. So he was trying to get medicine. And here I am telling him that I'm not even his biological child, which means he also has no biological grandchildren, which upset my daughter tremendously because she's got his last name, and well, so I did too until I got married.
Yeah.
But finally, when I told him everything that, he had told, that I found out and everything, he's like, it don't matter. He said, you're still my daughter and I love you just the same. But I told him that everybody knew. And I said, he needed to know. And I said, I've known for 6 months. And it was really eating me up, lying to my dad. It really bothered me.
Yeah.
And so he thanked me for telling him. And I sent him, he has seen pictures of me and Chris, together. Whenever we get together, we take pictures, of course, because he's on my Facebook. And I have now a lot of new family on Facebook. And that was partly another reason why I wanted my dad to know, was so that I didn't want people to think you're going to get a kick out of this. I didn't want people to think I was cheating on my husband, because every time I would post something, Chris would love it. He would put a heart, whether it was pictures or something. And I'm thinking, oh my God, people are going to wonder who this person is that is loving everything I say. And it's my new brother.
Yeah.
So, I came out on Facebook and said that, that I had done my ancestry DNA and found out I have a half brother. No one really knows on who had to goof up, you know what I mean? If it was my mom or my dad, because I didn't go into detail. I just said, if anyone had any questions, feel free to send me a message and I'll answer you. Yeah. But I didn't put it out there that my mom messed around on my dad. I just couldn't see the point of putting that out there,
Sure.
But I had a couple people that got a hold of me, like people that I have known and went to school with, that I've known since 3rd grade, and they were all just as dumbfounded as I was.
Yeah. Yeah, really.
And still I am.
Oh, totally. And Meredith, like you were saying before, no one really asks us, like, well, what's going on, or how are you, or how are you doing with that? It's except for, I feel like most NPs I've talked with, they all have like one best friend and maybe one close family member that still check in with them. But yeah, everyone else, I don't know if they think they don't want to upset us, but yeah.
My mom hasn't asked me how I'm doing.
Of course.
My dad hasn't, but I think
they're still together.
It's probably upsetting. Yeah. Yeah, and he didn't tell my mom right away that he knew. He kept trying to drop hints to get her to tell him herself. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So, and she didn't. He finally looked at her and said, I know. And why didn't you tell me? And she's like, well, I tried and it was just never the right time. And, and I'm thinking to myself, I was 49. You had 49 years. When is the right time?
And you mentioned earlier that there's a story about your father, but it involves a knife. Was she trying to...
I think she was trying to say it was forced.
Okay.
That he held a knife to her throat.
That was going to be...
forced or whatever.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I have found a lot of women resort to saying that.
In the NPE world, it appears to be kind of a common theme, which is hard because right now we're trying to support victims of sexual assault, and yet in our NPE world, we have a different sort of mother.
And my whole thing is, that's got to be the worst thing, is to tell your child they are a product of rape.
Oh, totally.
Don't tell them that if it's not true.
Not if it's not true.
Because that could really mess with somebody's head.
Yeah.
And luckily I knew my mom was fibbing, or else that probably would have sent me to go to some kind of a, counseling or something. But I could just tell. My dad, even when I told him that my mom said it was forced, he's like, nah, I don't believe it.
Yeah. You said, when she's lying.
Yeah. Well, and then my dad dropped a bombshell on me, and, growing up, we were always told my mom had a miscarriage between me and my older brother and then had one after me. No, she didn't have a miscarriage after me. She had an abortion after me.
Do you think
And
that
my dad is the one that told me that because he thought my mom was messing around on him when she was bartending. So he had her sister take her down and to Columbus. So this would have been like 1972 and have an abortion. And I asked my dad, I said, how did you know if it was yours or not? How did you not know that? He said, I didn't. So all this time, mom's like, oh, I've had 2 miscarriages. No, it wasn't a miscarriage that you had after me. Mm-hmm. So, of course, I didn't tell her dad told me that because what's the point?
Yeah.
I just couldn't see the point of bringing all that up. But, yeah, they're still married. I mean, they've been married since 1965. And everybody, when I tell them about it, they're like, and your mom and dad's still together? Well, yeah, they've been together since 1965. Yeah. I mean, they're not going nowhere. They have that's just how it is. They just are winging it, and they're still just how they were before. Now, I haven't seen my dad since last time I saw him was I saw them a year ago, and I knew about the situation, but my dad didn't know about the situation. You know what I mean? And so when me and my daughter was over, they were packing up stuff. And of course, my daughter broke down, started crying when she was hugging my dad or something. And so she went and got in the van, and my mom's like, well, what's wrong with her? And I looked at my mom after my dad went inside, and I said, well, Mom, probably because of the fact that Dad's not my dad. She's upset, and my daughter was upset because my mom wasn't telling him.
Yeah.
And she thought the same thing I did, that my dad would be horribly upset if he knew that everybody else knew, but nobody told him.
Well, yeah. You don't, Meredith, you don't seem like the type of person that's going to continue a lie, even though.
Oh, no.
So many of us are like, let's live in truth. We won't sweep things under the rug. I get that.
Well, and it's, if my dad wasn't who he was and wasn't such a good dad growing up, and he provided us with, a good home. I mean, it wasn't like we were rich or whatever, but we had a roof over our head. If we had Christmases, birthdays, we had family dinners, and all that. So if he wouldn't have been that kind of a father, he just deserved it. He deserved to know. Mm-hmm. Even though he's, in his 80s, he still deserved to know. And he has a bad heart. So that was my big worry at first was, oh my God, this is going to destroy my dad. But actually, it hasn't even changed anything. Even when we talk on the phone, it's still, like I'll tell him if, like when we went to Myrtle Beach, I sent him and Mom both pictures of me and Chris, so it's not like I'm not rubbing it in Dad's face, but I'm also not talking about it.
Yeah.
Because it's who I am.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not going to hide it. Heck no.
I am running low on time, but I want if people want to get in touch with you and know more, how could they do that?
I have a Gmail email, and it's Meredith, Meredith, and the last name is Groves, Groves, and it's 2003 at gmail.com.
And I will put.
And I'm also on Facebook.
With that same name?
Well, no, now on Facebook, my maiden name is in there. So it's Meredith Chisholm, Chism, Groves, Groves.
Thank you so much for being so open today. Welcome. I really appreciate this, Meredith. These stories are here for us to identify with. If you are an NPE that would like to share your story, email npestories@gmail.com. You do not have to give any identifying information. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, I'd like to hear from you. Subscribe to this podcast to hear more. Come heal with us.